The national election for 2012 is almost here, and with all the debates and campaign slogans, how can we determine what is true? Well, here to help us sort out the complex issues related to especially the economy is Dr. Timothy Roth from UTEP. Welcome, Dr. Roth.
Thank you, Holly. Pleasure to be here again.
Yes, well, it's good to have you. So what are the few key issues in the election? What's going to determine the election, do you think?
Well, I suppose in the interest of full disclosure to begin with, I ought to be forthcoming about my position. I was a delegate to the Republican National Convention, and so I do have a perspective. But let me suggest this. I'm an economist, and the relatively narrow focus during the campaign has been the economy. And without question, that is a decisive issue and will, I think from the point of view of most voters, be the decisive issue. But I think perhaps from the perspective of your viewers, there's another dimension to this that is critically important, and that is this election is really about the failure on the part of the incumbent administration to appreciate the value of institutions, whether formal or informal. There is, in my opinion, no respect for the Constitution, for federalism, the separation of powers. There's a propensity to try to vastly expand the role and scope of the federal government without taking account of those institutional constraints. And relatedly, there is no respect, in my opinion, for the informal institutions like the family that have essentially, that have been the glue of this society. So here's the way I would summarize it. Contemporary liberalism long ago adopted the view that it is almost the responsibility of the individual always to question institutions and to ask questions like, why should I do that? It's all about moral and political space. And I believe that's what the incumbent administration is all about. And that has implications then for constitutional jurisprudence, for the Supreme Court nominees that would be forthcoming under the incumbent president were he to be reelected. So there's a panoply of issues that are at least as important as the economy.
So even though the economy is where the pain is felt for most people, there are really other issues that we should be looking at. Can you translate what that might look like? Another issue that you're talking about in terms of the separation of church and state or federalism that might affect me personally, just to personalize it a little bit.
Without question, under the general heading of the Affordable Health Care Act, we all know that Catherine Sebelius, the Health and Human Services Secretary, decided, with the imprimatur of the president, obviously, to issue an edict that essentially told churches and their members that they have to put aside whatever dogma, whatever perspective they have on the question of the life of the unborn,
right,
and the provision of contraceptive services and so on and so forth. And that's a clear invasion. It shows disrespect for the First Amendment, for the free exercise of religion clause. It is, in my opinion, almost without precedent in American history. And that, I believe, is a metaphor for what this administration is inclined to do. No respect for incumbent institutions. And then to say, in effect, to the Catholic Church, I happen to be Roman Catholic, I won't speak for other religions, but in effect to say to Roman Catholics, all right, we won't expect you to do this immediately. We'll give you a year for you to become acclimated to this. Is an outrage. And I don't know what else to say. This is unconscionable.
And so there would be hundreds of other examples like this that we would see played out in other aspects of life.
Well, without question. And let me drag the economic issues in for just a moment to put things in perspective. There is in the Constitution a so-called non-delegation clause, which essentially says that the Congress cannot delegate legislative authority to the executive, to the president and the executive generally. this administration has a marked propensity to decide unilaterally to interpret existing law in any way in which it wishes to interpret it. And so you have a massive expansion of the role and scope of, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency through a deliberate misrepresentation of the Clean Air Act. And again, this has to do with the separation of powers, and they don't care. Federalism, same idea. The idea that, okay, it's the federal government's prerogative to expand its power at the expense of the states. And I think the public has begun to react to all of that.
Right.
But so it's informal institutions, formal institutions, no respect.
Yeah. And so an example of what you're talking about would be where they've raised the standards for clean air so high and so pointedly that the coal power can basically not function legally. Is that right?
That's, I believe,
can't.
the ultimate goal. But there's nothing in the enabling legislation that empowers the executive to do that.
Yeah.
If they want to do that, they have to, under the Constitution, should go back to the Congress and get authorization through changes in the text of the statutory law. They won't do it. They don't feel the need.
Yeah. And so by doing a lot of this kind of backdoor administrative legislation, the economy and businesses and industries and agendas can be manipulated.
Without question.
Yeah.
And it also means, in a more elementary way, that no one can plan anything because you have an executive that is capricious beyond imagination. Okay, today we'll do this. We'll have an executive order for this. And frankly, I don't understand why more of it is not challenged in the House of Representatives by the Oversight Committee, the government oversight. And I do, slightly off the subject perhaps, I do stipulate that Representative Issa has his hands full as chairman of that committee. You don't have enough staff, you don't have enough time in the day to react to all of this.
Yeah, it's almost so much that it's overwhelming for anybody to deal with, including the Government Oversight Committee.
Exactly, and I have to say, under the rubric of lack of respect for institutions, I do not see any evidence that the incumbent administration appreciates the history of and the role of the military. And more broadly, I don't think the administration understands the history of the United States and its role in the world during its history. And a metaphor for the whole thing is what happened in Benghazi. Right? A whole other story. But
so, and how does that evidence that? How does what happened in Benghazi evidence, if our viewers aren't familiar with what happened in Benghazi, since it's not being covered in the national media? Irreducible
minimum. An American ambassador and 3 other individuals, including 2 Navy SEALs, were killed by Islamic militants. Period. We know this. And it was denied from the beginning by the White House and attributed to a film. And by the way, to the best of my knowledge, the person who produced that film is still in jail. And I'd like to know under what law. Right. That's a separate matter. But the point is, the ambassador, put the other 3 aside for just a moment, focus on the ambassador. The ambassador represented the United States.
Right.
He is killed wantonly.
Tortured and killed.
Tortured and killed.
Right, yeah.
And there's no attempt to make clear that this cannot be tolerated, that this will not be tolerated. And it's, again, there is no sense that the United States has a proper role in projecting its power, and by the way, over the years, using the military and the diplomatic establishment to help other nations.
Right.
Which, by the way, brings into focus the other dimension to all of this, and that is the incumbent administration does not accept the idea that this is an exceptional country.
Right, yeah.
And that's also part of our received history. It's part of our culture.
Right.
And just rejection of all of that.
Yeah, Yeah, that's definitely American exceptionalism isn't at the top of the list. So if you looked at just kind of laying them side by side in complete objectivity without editorial comment, can you lay out President Obama's economic plan, what he's been doing, and how that would move forward for the future, and Governor Romney's economic plan and what he is proposing for the future?
Let me try to distill this in a sort of antiseptic way.
Right.
I think that any objective observer would say the following about the incumbent administration. It's all about redistribution of income and wealth. That's what it's about.
Which some people may agree with.
Well, and I understand. And by the way, there is a role, in my opinion, for transfer programs intended to help the needy. We could talk about that at some length if you wish. I don't think that's in dispute. I don't know how a person who is other regarding, cares about other people, could responsibly reject the idea that we ought to care about our fellow human beings.
Right.
I stipulate to that. But this is different. The administration seems to have adopted the view of the progressives of the early 20th century that it is immoral for someone to do better than someone else. That's a different perspective. And a corollary of all of that is that whatever wealth is possessed, it is the government's prerogative to appropriate it for other uses.
Right.
So that's one dimension to it, and the other part of it is that the incumbent administration has a very expansive view of the role of the government in the economy, so that, for example, the incumbent administration doesn't blink at the idea that we should identify winners and losers in the economy, target the winners, subsidize them, and then do whatever we can for the losers. But that's antithetical to the other approach, which says, yes, things ought to be done for the needy. But government is not ultimately about the business of income and wealth redistribution. It's about providing a decision environment that is congenial to economic growth, as President Kennedy used to say, to enable us to lift all boats.
Right. Yeah. Now, what evidence do we have of the concept of redistribution being enacted right now?
Well,
I mean, that we know that is in fact where President Obama's mindset is.
well, there tremendous amount of evidence,
Yeah.
to put it simply. You can make the case that from the very beginning, President Obama, was committed to the idea that blame must be placed on the rich for a variety of problems, including the collapse of the housing market.
Right.
We could talk about that as a separate topic. I believe I have a better appreciation of the source of that problem. President Obama has consistently used Wall Street as a metaphor for everything that's wrong with capitalism.
Right.
And the latent presumption is that there must be more regulation and appropriation of the returns to investments of that sort by the government. And all we really have to do is listen to the man. He talked this way before he was elected. So again, I don't mean this to be an ad hominem attack on the president. It's just transparent that he is totally committed to the idea that the first responsibility of the federal government is to redistribute income and wealth for the benefit of whomever. But I have to say that he never talks about the poor. It's always the middle class. And the beneficiaries of the policy that he's adopted are almost uniformly things like labor unions. Right? And
Right,
that's not the view
They're
of...
the ones who own General Motors right now. Right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And under the bankruptcy arrangement, it was a bankruptcy arrangement
Right.
with General Motors, the executive, the White House ensured that the union would step ahead of bondholders.
Right. which is not typical in a true bankruptcy arrangement, right?
Without, and in fact, it is illegal. It's illegal, and ought to have been challenged aggressively by somebody.
Yeah, yeah. But there's so much to challenge. I think how come
Without
we do it.
question.
So, can you give us? Okay, so one of the things that our current administration keeps saying is that we need more time. That the situation that we inherited economically was so bad. It was so deep, so profound, far worse than anything we'd imagined. We had 2 wars that were bankrupting the country, and the housing crisis and all of this stuff. It's been so bad that it's taken us longer than we had expected to dig ourselves out, so we need another 4 years in which to do so. Can you give me an example in history of a similar situation that an administration inherited, where there were certainly bad economic indicators, it was a bad economic downswing, and it either took them a long time or they were able to resurrect it very quickly?
As you may recall, I served in the Reagan administration,
Right.
and so once again, I can't be totally objective about this, but many of your viewers, I believe, will recall the set of circumstances that greeted President Reagan when he was elected. We had the prime rate at 21%. The unemployment rate was in the neighborhood of 15%. The housing market was bust. Sales of durable goods dissipating. The problems that confronted that administration in 1980 were at least the equal of the problems that confronted this administration. The difference is that President Reagan, in my opinion, had the right idea. His solution was not income and wealth redistribution. It was not the institutionalization of an affordable health care plan that we cannot afford, could not afford. It was to put in place a stable decision environment that would allow people to forecast what would happen to them if they did this or did that or did not do this and did not do that. He set about the business of cutting tax rates, put an effective moratorium on new regulations, and by the way, the president can't do that, urged the Federal Reserve to reduce money growth so as to draw down the inflation rate at the same time as fiscal policy was essentially on the accelerator, but in a proper way through tax cuts, not massive increases in spending, with one exception, and that was the military, where we went to ultimately 600 ships, which is what we need now, but that's a separate topic. So the point is, the problems were essentially resolved by the time the first Reagan term expired. Essentially, he won a massive, unprecedented re-election that is beyond the imagination of this administration. It was done. So he doesn't need a second term. He made mistakes. And those mistakes mean he doesn't deserve to be reelected.
Right. And so one of the key things that you keep mentioning is an environment in which business can make predictions about what is going to happen.
Without question. Not you're right, business, without question, but also individuals, who, by the way, frequently are small business.
Right.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago, 3 days ago, I can't recall when it was. It was all about, okay, what do you do as the end of the year approaches with respect to your asset portfolio if you have one, right? And the answer was, you can't possibly know. Arguably, the best thing to do is to sit quietly until you find out what's going to happen. Now, what kind of a decision environment is that?
Yeah.
And it's really all about capricious policies that mean that individuals cannot figure out in any meaningful way what to do. And so you essentially do nothing. And there are little windows of growth, like automobile sales, but that's largely because the fleet is now 11 years old, and people have to replace cars eventually. So that's
not really an indicator.
It's not an indicator, exactly.
Yeah. So basically, that's very simply one of the reasons why we've seen such small economic growth is because nobody wants to take risks, nobody can predict the future, and so everybody just sits on it until they can.
Yes, but there's another decisive thing that most economists don't ever talk about, and that is the public is not stupid. Mm-hmm. The public looks at the fact that we've now run up $16 trillion worth of debt. The public knows that in the future that's going to mean that spending's going to have to be reduced, and inevitably, I don't endorse it, but Congress will promote, and virtually any sitting administration will likely say, okay, we'll have to have some tax increases, for example, for Social Security, right? You factor that into your thinking. I don't want to spend a whole lot today if I know that I'm going to be hit with increased liability in the future. And by the way, my children are as well, and my grandchildren. And so the prudent thing to do, if you don't know what the decision environment is going to look like, is to postpone decisions like buying durable goods, like buying a home, but layer on top of that the fact that you know you're going to have to pay higher taxes in the future no matter what people tell you, and so you retrench.
And all of this kind of works together to create a stalled economic environment.
Precisely. It was precisely the opposite of what happened in the Reagan years.
Right. And so if we have 4 more years of President Obama's policy, people are going to have to choose between, you know, one vision, which is sort of redistribution of wealth, slow economic growth, and what now? If Governor Romney is elected, what will he do? What can we predict from him?
Well, it's Romney Ryan, of course.
Right.
And Ryan, credit him as chairman of the House Budget Committee for having thought about entitlement reform and all that implies. The bottom line is that whereas current retirees are not going to be affected by anything that the new administration will do, there will be a very systematic and deliberate effort to reduce the rate of increase of spending and to reduce tax rates, which precisely corresponds to what President Reagan did. And by the way, I don't know that Governor Romney has said this, but implicit in what he's saying is that we need a moratorium on new regulations so that people can plan. And he's also been very clear about being worried about a Federal Reserve that's essentially out of control. The Romney-Ryan ticket, in other words, does not accept the idea that we can continue to spend essentially in an unbridled way. One little anecdote. If you look at the President's February 2012 budget proposal, the total debt in fiscal 2012 is $16 trillion. Under the President's budget, it would be by 2022, $25 trillion. That is unconscionable, unmanageable. We're already heading toward Greece.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, God help us. It would not happen under a Romney-Ryan administration, in my opinion.
So, again, briefly, what happened in Greece, and how would we replicate that? I mean, the Greeks are still living; they're still doing their things. So, is this really a real issue? Everybody points to Greece, but what does that mean?
Well, it is a real issue to begin with. The Greek government began the process of falling when its debt as a percent of gross domestic product, total output of goods and services, reached 103%. U.S. debt now as a percent of our GDP is 105% and climbing.
Oh.
We're worse off than Greece was. The difference is that Greece's currency was a little different than the dollar, which is used as a unit of account in international trade, but slowly being displaced by the Chinese currency. point is, we can't sustain this. And by the way, the reason the Greeks have been able to survive as they have until recently, in spite of the fact that they will not undertake the austerity measures that have been demanded by the Germans especially, is because the Germans have been rolled by the EU in the interest of trying to preserve the euro and underwritten the Greeks. But here's my prediction. You didn't ask, but I'll volunteer this.
Okay.
The Germans will not long tolerate this.
Right.
And they will eventually say, not another euro to the Greeks, to the Italians, to the Spanish, to the Portuguese. And when that happens, Southern Europe will collapse. And the point is, right now, we are borrowing from the Chinese, who may at some cross-section of time say, we're not going to buy any more of your debt. And when that happens, we're totally reliant on the Federal Reserve to do it, and that's inflation. It's just a disaster.
Which then creates all kinds of huge economic problems, kind of like the Great Depression?
Precisely. Just start with people on fixed incomes. What a disaster. And you don't have to be on fixed income if the inflation rate reaches 8, 9, 10%, and it's on its way, by the way, to suffer serious pain, because people aren't getting increases in pay on the order of magnitude that they were getting. It's just not happening because businesses can't compete if they pay that.
Right.
Even Wall Street,
Yeah.
the bonuses are essentially going to zero.
Yeah. All right. Well, it sounds like there is a very clear choice depending on what your vision is for the future, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I'll add is that it's not hard for a person who is other regarding, who does care about other people, to conclude that, well, all right, I like what I hear. An incumbent administration wants to help the poor, whatever. But it's quite another thing to pause and say, wait a minute, nothing is free. And there are other ways to help the needy, and the principal way to do that is through economic growth, not through redistribution schemes.
Yeah. Right. Well, Dr. Roth, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and once again, you've been very enlightening. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I hope so.
Good. Has this helped clarify for you some of the key issues that are coming up in this election? Remember, it's not just about electing a president, but there are also many other officials who are at the national, state, and local level who also affect our economy and affect a lot of decisions. So we need to be praying for God's perfect will to be accomplished in this election. Thank you very much for watching.